All right, I'm going to get us started. Looks like we're generally holding steady with the number of participants joining. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Molly DeMarco. I'm here at UNC Chapel Hill with our SNAP-Ed Toolkit team and also ASNA's Race, Health, and Social Equity Committee. Latrice Davenport is also with me. We're co-hosting this event, and she'll be talking to you in just a minute. And then we'll have our presentations. We're really excited to bring you this part 3 of our series of webinar trainings on how to advance equity within SNAP-Ed programming and administration. I would like to go to the next slide, please. Thanks, Rachel. So we wanted to start out with a land acknowledgement. I'm just going to read this, and then I also invite you all to, in the chat, if you like, to share whose land you are on today. We gather for this webinar from different places, but all in the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit and the practices in which we engage. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Just to give you a little bit of a roadmap for where we're going today, I'm doing the housekeeping and that sort of thing. I'm going to then turn it to Latrice, who's going to provide a framing for what we're talking about today related to how to address equity internally within our organizations. We then have assembled some exciting folks to provide an overview of the work that they've been doing in their organizations. Latrice will wrap up with some reflections for you and for us. And hopefully we're going to make time to have some Q&A. So we will do that at the end and then do a few wrap up next steps. Next slide, please. Some nuts and bolts. We are asking that you use the Q&A section for putting in any questions you have for the panelists, or I guess Latrice and myself. We do have the chat opened, and I see y'all are making good use of it. We like to have that opened if people want to ask each other questions or share reflections during the presentations. We just ask that you be mindful of the discussion agreements that I have on the next slide, and be mindful and respectful and humble in your chat comments. We do have the live captioning available. If you click on live transcript CC button down below, you can turn that on for yourself. You did receive the link to the slides we have in your reminder email today. You probably had to scroll all the way down to find that, but you do have it if you want to follow along or just to know that you don't need to be taking notes. This is also being recorded. The recording and the slides will be posted on all of the hosts' websites, and anyone who registered and or joined us will receive an email with that link too. We'll also endeavor to send the Q&A in typed up format out to y'all. We can go to the next slide. All right, we did want to go over the objectives for attendees for this webinar. They are threefold. First is we think that attendees will be able to identify 2 practices that their organization can implement to advance equity in internal workplace policies related to recruitment, hiring, and retention. Also describe 3 strategies to work within your human resources system to provide job descriptions and conduct recruitment and hiring with an equity lens. For example, how to include lived experience as a job requirement. And the last is to identify their sphere of influence and how their decisions can impact equity within their organization related to employee hiring and retention. Next slide. We use this slide for all of our webinars, and I just wanted to go over this again, that this webinar is not open to discussions that question or challenge the existence of racism, injustice, and inequity. This webinar is also not a place to question the validity of learning about race, racism, equity, or white supremacy. We encourage you all in your questions and in the chat to share your learnings, reflections, and truths using I statements whenever possible, focusing on your own experiences and understandings. And also to treat each other with respect, honesty, appreciation, and grace whenever possible. As many of you will be in different, places along your learning path. I do encourage anyone who has questions about this during the webinar to email me. Happy to dialogue about that. Thank you. We can move to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Latrice now to provide an overview of where we're going and why. Latrice.
All right, thank you, Molly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latrice Davenport. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the SNAP-Ed program coordinator at the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services. Next slide. So I'll start with some guiding principles, and these were collectively created from the Race, Health, and Social Equity Committee, and they include do no harm, and that people that we serve, who we work alongside of, that have been most harmed from disinvestment, discrimination, and disenfranchisement are in the best positions to inform solutions. People are the expert of their own lives. Impact is more important than intent. We should be ultimately accountable to the communities that we serve, that we start this work with opportunity, and that we be as transparent as we can. And we also believe that healthy food access is a right and not a privilege. And all people, no matter gender, ethnicity, race, class, sexual orientation, national origin, disability, or age, hold this right. Next slide, please. Our committee is currently working on drafting a very broad definition of equity. And I wanted to say that definition is working, and so it'll be revisited and revised fairly often. But I did want to share that definition here as a way to kind of guide the work that we're doing. And we've separated out between process and outcome, and process really thinking through how we do this work, and how exactly are we relating our work to the communities that we work alongside of. And so some questions to think about, or some concepts to think about, could include equitable access to programming, shifting power and resources to marginalized communities, centering marginalized communities in decision-making, so developing those processes and practices, and developing a shared definition for success. And for outcomes, thinking through equitable outcomes, shared program benefits, diversifying the workforce, improving the material and intangible circumstances of marginalized communities. With this kind of North Star, I want to think through some of the ways that discrimination kind of shows itself, so to speak. Next slide, please. So we have kind of 4 different ways: internal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. And we're going to focus most of today's webinar around the institutional. And we will be talking about processes and workplace culture. And so really thinking about how do we change those and shift those so that we are really centering community, really changing who's making decisions and expanding that. Next slide, please. The goal of this work is to really build a race equity culture, and it's one that's focused on proactively counteracting race inequities inside and outside of the organization. So really, kind of thinking through prioritizing data collection, thinking about who makes decisions, how are decisions about recruitment and promotion and retention and workplace culture decided, who influences that, and who are those change agents that can really lead this work. I also want to note that we do focus on race specifically, but not exclusively. There are a number of other oppressive systems, and so we want to make sure that even though that we are specifically focusing on race equity here, that you'll see throughout the webinar that the issues that we tackle are broad. Next slide, please. So I look at one of the models from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity for strategic approaches to institutional change. And they include normalize, which is kind of establishing that shared language, using a race equity framework and operating with urgency and accountability, making sure that it's not a kind of slow walk, but really instilling that these are urgent and pressing matters and to start doing work, even if it isn't perfect. Organize, which is really building organizational capacity. And this can be through training, technical assistance, learning circles, partnering with other organizations and communities to understand, gain insight around how your organization is viewed within the community, and what are some actionable steps to change those if they are harmful. And the last is operationalize, so really implementing racial equity tools such as equity audits and being data driven, collecting data and using it as a way to really guide the work that we do. And this can be through disaggregating data and using it to guide our projects. And next slide, please. So just a check-in, we have a quick poll. And it will pop up on your screen. There are 3 options. And we'd like to know from attendees, how are you involved in the hiring process within your organization? I haven't been yet. I've helped out with hiring, served on search committees, for example, or I've led hiring and retention processes. And I'll give you a couple of moments to think through that and select your answers. Are we almost done? Are we sharing results? Okay. It looks like 35% haven't yet. About 39% have helped out with hiring or served on the search committee. And about 26% have led hiring and retention processes. Thanks so much for sharing that experience with us. And so, next slide, please. We will hear from several speakers today. Each of them we are really excited about. Each of their bios are in the webinar registration link. And so if you're really interested in knowing a little bit about them, you can find that information there. And our first speaker will be Alana Serrano at Virginia Tech, University. And I will pass it over to her.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today. Okay, my name is Elena Serrano. I'm the director of Virginia SNAP Ed, also Virginia FNAP, and I am at Virginia Tech, and also part of Virginia Cooperative Extension, where SNAP Ed is administered through. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Today I'm going to talk about a promotion program we have within Virginia SNAP Ed and FNAP. To help promote advancement for our diverse employee pool that represents SNAP eligible audiences, we reach and collaborate with our peer educators or paraprofessional educators. They are the foundation of our direct education within Virginia SNAP Ed. And so this provides an organizational structure figure to help you visualize Virginia SNAP Ed. So as you can see, we have several different components of Virginia SNAP Ed. We do have direct education that is provided by peer educators. We also have direct education that's provided by trained volunteers who are trained by our master's level SNAP Ed agents. More recently, we have added the policy systems and environmental change initiatives, which are facilitated by our SNAP Ed agents, as well as social media and marketing. So moving forward, I'm going to provide an overview of the roles and responsibilities of the position of the peer educators, the rationale for the promotion program, and then some of the processes and resources that we created to help support these employees and help to promote advancement as well as retention within our peer educators. One other thing I wanted to note is that we refer to our peer educators, the paraprofessional educators, as program assistants in Virginia. So I will use those terms interchangeably throughout the presentation. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. First, I just wanted to share a position description for our program assistants or peer educators. This one is for peer educators that work with adults. Like I said, they're responsible for direct education for Virginia SNAP Ed as well as FNEP. And in that role, they recruit, enroll, teach comprehensive programs, evidence-based programs on basic principles of food resource management, food preparation, nutrition, and physical activity. They also collaborate with local agencies and organizations that work with people living in poverty. Okay, next slide, please. The peer education or paraprofessional model has a long history of being used to create, deliver, and evaluate nutrition education to audiences with limited resources. Peer educators ideally represent the culture, language, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status of the groups they serve, and therefore can tailor educational programs and interventions to meet the needs of their target population in a manner to be optimally effective for participants and even for themselves. As a result, peer educators are recruited from target communities with a high proportion of SNAP eligible audiences. In Virginia, we have criteria actually for the number of SNAP eligible households and schools for peer educator positions to be located. We do not require any nutrition background whatsoever for these positions. We do provide intensive 2 weeks of training for all staff on nutrition and other core competencies required for this position. Our main goal when we're hiring for this position is that the individuals can relate with and communicate with the target communities and that they're well respected by their community members. Virginia is an extremely diverse state with regards to race and ethnicity, and our peer educators definitely reflect that, particularly related to race. Okay, next slide, please. Oops, I advanced a little too fast, but that's okay. A high school diploma or GED are required to be hired for the position. A small proportion of our employees have bachelor's degrees, but we actually discourage master's degrees for this specific position for a number of reasons. One being that one of our goals as an organization is to promote advancement and alternative career paths for our target audiences. Within Virginia Cooperative Extension, within Virginia SNAP Ed, we did identify a tremendous gap between the peer educators and the next level of position, which was a master's level position. And that prevented advancement and promotion. So we worked with the College Division of Human Resources to develop what we called a Senior Program Assistant track, PA track, to help address that gap. The process took about 6 months to implement. We had a lot of discussions about what our specific expectations and goals were for the promotion program. We knew that we wanted to provide advancement opportunities, and we also wanted to provide opportunities for higher salary, but we also needed to consider the structure of our university, staff positions, and to consider additional duties and responsibilities. Based on these discussions, we determined that we had 2 main goals for the senior PA position beyond advancement and promotion. And that was to provide an opportunity for our existing employees to provide trainings to their peers, as well as mentorship to other program assistants within our organization. We also determined that we did not want to select individuals who would be able to be promoted, but rather we wanted a competitive application process. We also did not want to necessarily select or have a quota for each of our districts, but instead we wanted the best candidates for this role. Okay, could you please advance? Thank you. So this is part of our application process. Like I said, we had determined that we felt that that would add some credence to the senior PA position, and that would also ensure that we would have the most exemplary program assistants serving in that role. And so some of the criteria and the qualifications we use to determine if someone would transition to a senior program assistant was that they had strong teaching performance and teaching skills. They also were proficient in record keeping, which is a critical element of this position, and that they were able to collaborate with other staff within our system and with families. They also show potential to coach and nurture other program assistants. Next slide, please. We also determined that we would accept applications once a year. So right now we're in the 4th year. We did pause during 2020 and 2021 for, obvious reasons. And so we established a leadership team that reviewed the applications, and we discussed with each of the supervisors of the program assistants about the selections. In the first 2 years, we also had HR involved in that just because it was a new process. Once we selected the successful applicants, we did create a retreat or training with all of the senior PAs. And this was a 1.5-day retreat, which was considered a celebration. And then we also discussed expectations, shared ideas about how to best implement it because it was a new program, and to also receive leadership training for this new role. We also had the start date coincide with our new programming year. We just felt that that would be a cleaner approach. Senior PAs are compensated with a 10% increase to their base salary, and currently we have 11 senior program assistants who represent each district, and both program assistants that work with youth and those that work with adults. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share some of the lessons learned from our experience. One was that specialized training and professional opportunities, professional development opportunities were really important to empower program assistants and to help transition them from colleagues to mentors and leaders. We did hold that initial retreat, and then we have followed up over the years with ongoing check-ins and other opportunities to discuss their role in trainings and in mentorship opportunities for program assistants. Another lesson learned is that you do require a designated staff person or persons. It doesn't need to be full-time to connect, follow up, and check in with senior PAs, especially in the infancy of this type of promotion program. Also, written guidelines are important for clear expectations and for the scope of the position, especially for the mentorship side. We were very clear that we did not want senior peer educators to supervise other peer educators. And so we really needed to be clear that if certain topics were broached with one of the senior program assistants, that those topics would be best referred to a supervisor or in some cases an evaluation specialist. Another component was how important it was to develop and share how the senior PAs who were promoted would be evaluated as part of the annual evaluation. Like I mentioned earlier, program assistants are part of our state staff evaluation system, and we have very specific metrics and evaluation system. And so they were concerned about how they would be evaluated with these additional responsibilities and what the metrics would be for that. So we did have to develop those tools and resources and communicate with them. Okay, next slide, please. Some of the resources that we created included the senior PA log and activity sheet, which is on the left here. And that was to be completed by the senior PA just to outline some of the activities they did. Again, we had one person who managed the senior PAs and checked in with them and made sure that they had all of the training and resources they needed to be successful. But that person was not the supervisor. So at the end of the year for the annual performance evaluation, that individual who managed the senior PAs worked with the senior PAs to provide an overview of the activities that were conducted as part of those senior PA responsibilities. And this was used as part of that tool. The other tool we developed were mentorship guidelines. And so this was used for when a senior PA was assigned to a new employee. And so some of the responsibilities and the guidelines for them to manage their mentorship role, just to give them something concrete to operate by. And so I'm happy to share any of these resources and give more details too, if you would like. Okay, next slide, please. So the successes that we've had. So we have found that employees value this opportunity for growth. When I entered into this director position, one of the things I did hear from field staff, from the program assistants, is that there was no opportunity for growth within our organization, within Virginia SNAP Ed or FNAP, or within Virginia Cooperative Extension. There were really only two levels of positions. There was the program assistant, peer educator, and the master's level agent, but not anything for those in between and those who might want to grow and advance and have some leadership opportunities, but may not have the degree credentials. The other things that we have heard are that other program assistants really appreciate the senior PAs. Sometimes they feel more comfortable calling a peer for support in place of their supervisor. Again, that can sometimes be a fine line because there are some topics that might be better suited to the supervisor, but they feel that they have a sounding board and for concerns. And the other aspect of that is that we also feel that we have a better communication line at the state level with some of the issues and concerns that field staff might be facing. So often senior PAs come to us with questions, concerns, things that they would like addressed on behalf of some of their colleagues. And we really, really appreciate that. And we feel like that really helps with our positive and inclusive culture. The other aspect of this is that we have also established a tuition reimbursement program. It is independent of the senior PA program, but I also wanted to note this because it's another opportunity for promotion and advancement for our program assistants who may wish to pursue a bachelor's degree or a master's degree outside of our institution. So our institution does provide free tuition. However, that's not always feasible. Some of our online programs are limited for example, in the scope or the topic of those degree programs. And all of our program assistants are off campus. And so again, they might be challenged in taking advantage of our institution's free tuition. And so we provide tuition up to 6 credits a year that's not paid out of the grant, obviously, but paid out of overhead to help them pursue another degree. And we feel like this is a great tandem to the senior PA promotion, which can allow for our PAs to receive degrees if they wish. One big success was that one of our senior PAs who did take advantage of obviously the senior PA promotion program, as well as the tuition program, became a SNAP Ed agent. So that is one of our biggest successes. And thank you. That's it for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Alana. We really appreciate you sharing that. That's very exciting. And we did get a couple of questions in the chat. We do want to direct you to the Q&A function. I'll try to copy and paste those in the chat, but if we don't, we'll try to respond to them in the Q&As after we complete the webinar. Now we have Dr. Jennifer Ward at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Ward, I'll hand it over.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I will be speaking about my experiences working at the University of Tennessee and drawing on my background as a leader in some other areas too. If you will advance the slide, please. So first I want to talk about me and who I am, and discuss a little bit about my positionality before we move forward. And I think this is really important when we're talking about issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion broadly, but also race specifically. You can probably tell I am a white woman and occupy a middle class status now. I come from a working class background. I identify as queer and have various and intersectional privileges and barriers related to those identities. And I bring all those into the work that I do and use both my lived experience and then my education, of course, in decision-making and things in our program. So right now I'm the program director at University of Tennessee for both our SNAP Ed and our FNET program. So I'll be talking a little bit about both of those and as much as they relate to each other, but particularly, of course, about SNAP Ed. And my professional background for over a decade was in refugee resettlement. So I've actually worked longer in an office where Arabic and Swahili were spoken more than English. And so I'm duly motivated to increase diversity in the SNAP Ed and in the environment I find myself now. And so it's really important for me to focus on inclusion in administration and leadership in terms of all the axes of diversity. We go to the next, please. So we have an imperative in SNAP Ed in general, and I believe in public health. We are charged with making SNAP eligible adults and families with nutrition and physical activity education. So embedded in that, of course, is a class perspective or the socioeconomic perspective, but you can't disentangle those from issues of race and gender, ability, and other axes of diversity like national origin or language. So we are charged with being good stewards of our funding and reducing health disparities related to nutrition security and food insecurity. So our implementing agencies and our partners must embed DEI and equity principles at all levels of our work. So if we are to reach diverse audiences, it is extremely important at the administrative level when we are managing our funds and our teams at the state levels and the county levels that we take this perspective. Next, please. So what good academic wouldn't have a theoretical perspective in their presentation? So none of my degrees have anything to do with business, but I do take a lot of continuing education and highly recommend Harvard Business Review articles and things on diversity. And so I am coming at you today from a transformational and authentic leadership lens in that, we have high standards of excellence for ourselves, and our decisions are related to an ideal. It's very self-reflective and authentic and encourages relationships, authentic and transparent. And so in this, it's really important, and what one of the objectives for the webinar today is to identify our sphere of influence within a larger system. So finding your position in place and finding where you have power, because you have power in what you do and the decisions that you make. Next, please. So as director, I came in with a bird's eye view of the program in Tennessee and found that it was essential to analyze the workforce that we had in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, including with a racial lens. Now, all of this is say, so my talk today is about wage equity and what we were able to do in Tennessee. But one of my favorite authors, Ijeoma Oluwa, wrote a book, So You Want to Talk About Race. She also wrote another book, Mediocre. It's very, very good. I highly recommend it. But in it, she begins talking about a conversation she had with a colleague about issues of class and specifically about issues around wages. And he said, don't you think if we just raise the living wage, then it'll help everyone? And she said, everything is racialized. And her point was that if you can't even get to the table to interview, if your name on your resume impedes your ability to get an interview, then raising the wage only helps some people. So there are inequitable impacts on very well-intentioned policies. So I am talking about wage equity and increasing wages, but it only works when you're talking about the whole picture in terms of human resources. So the hiring, retention, and promotion parts of these. And Elena, I'm really glad that you talked about the promotion part, because that's something that was an approach we took also to raise wages for some of our people. So in all aspects of human resources lies the potential for unconscious bias and hidden biases, but these are not just on an individual level. We are not just talking about a bias someone might have about a name on a resume or about somebody in a hiring committee or in a meeting. They are institutionalized, and sometimes they appear race neutral, but the impact is not race neutral. And that wage is a really good example. So it's really important to talk about that and to think about things in that way, so that we move away from thinking about people or individuals as having bad intentions and weeding those people out, which they do exist, and it's important to do that. However, looking at policies and seeing the racialized impact that they might have. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'll be talking about the Tennessee example, and so what we were able to do here. You see a map of Tennessee. We have 95 counties. I am situated in Knoxville, but I'm always traveling all around this beautiful state. Our priority here, and my priority, is our people. And the way I view my role at kind of the top of SNAP-Ed and FNEP in Tennessee is to serve the people that work and that are on my payroll so that they can go and serve the people of Tennessee. One of my primary goals when I first came to this position was to look at wage equity. We have our FNEP program is primarily in our urban counties, so in our metros of Memphis, Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville. And then our SNAP-Ed program is more widespread and consists of more professional level positions with program assistants, like Dr. Serrano said, and that they have at Virginia Tech in surrounding counties. In the last 3 years, we've raised our starting wage from about $13 an hour to $15 an hour, with quite a big range. I actually didn't do the range on that, but so in a few years we raised the starting wage up $2 an hour and dealt with compression issues that resulted from that. So when we raised the starting wage, we had to raise everyone up. And we went through human resources and compensation, and they did some kind of magic behind the scenes to figure that out. And I think that's a really good example of working within a larger institution. There's a lot of things that we don't have control over or that we might not see. And so it's important not to rest on the laurels of a large institution and a human resources department. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The impact this had on our budget was about $300,000 a year, which is significant. So when you're talking about, doing something to an ideal, raising wages because it is a good thing to do, you have to recognize the really practical implications of that, which meant, money isn't endless. And so I had to make cuts other places. Right now, Tennessee SNAP Ed program our salaries and benefits are about 67% of our total budget. That is hopefully where it will stay. I'm always looking at making sure that it is something that we can sustain so that we don't ever have to look at a reduction in force or anything like that. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So the problem was that our wages were too small. Starting out, I realized that we were losing valuable employees because of our hourly wages, and we were creating our own audience. So we were funding or staffing in a way that was creating our own audience, and that was wrong to me. It was a moral failure. And so the solution was to work on raising these starting wages, which wasn't as easy as writing it into the grant. Now, it's my belief, if you'll go to the next slide, please, that budgets are moral documents. Budgets showcase where our priorities are. So where we spend our money shows where our priorities are. And if our priority is our people, then our salaries and benefits should reflect that. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So the strategies we use to raise pay within our programs. So I know SNAP Ed is implemented in a lot of different ways across the nation, but in Tennessee, it's operated through the land-grant universities through Extension, which is a large, sometimes cumbersome organization. And it meant that I wasn't the only person that was funding positions at the same pay band. So it was really important to engage with people that were also funding positions at the same level that I did. To increase the line item for salaries and benefits, I had to cut costs elsewhere. So we were really trimming the fat on our printing, shipping, things like that. I engaged in an effort to analyze our staffing plan and its sustainability. And that 67% number was really important to look at, to do the projections in our budget and to make sure that even with the step increases that our governor signs into place, that we could sustain the people that we hired in the long term. Just like Virginia Tech and Dr. Serrano, we reclassified some of our program assistants. So in order to raise the wage there, we found a new way, and then we created a new position. So we didn't call it the senior program assistant, we called it program assistant 3. And so we were able to reclassify one in each region. Tennessee has 3 regions, the Western, Central, and Eastern. And so that increased their pay and reflected their longer tenure in the position and their performance. And we also, in our budget in Tennessee, leverage multiple programs. So it is a benefit that we operate FNEP and SNAP Ed under the same kind of structure and the same department. And so, for instance, I'm funded 70% through SNAP Ed and 30% through FNEP. So we can have a lot of people on that can contribute to both grants, and that helps spread out some of our costs and make it make sense, I guess, in the budget. So it was really also important to do separate and periodic analyses of our wages and to disaggregate it by demographics. So what I did find is that people that were hired, 3 to 5 years before I started, had a significantly lower wage than the people that were hired more recently. And so by doing a separate analysis and a periodic analysis and separating it by disaggregating by race and gender, we found that there were some women of color that were paid significantly less in the same pay band and with the same amount of experience. And so we worked quickly to rectify that disparity. We wouldn't have been able to do that without an intentional analysis and going to human resources and saying, run this through compensation again, because it can just keep moving on. You'll go to the next slide, please. So there's some potential pitfalls here. It's not just about writing more money into the grant. We have stagnant funding in Tennessee. I don't know if who else can relate to that. Also, our costs have gone up. So printing costs more, our nutrition reinforcements cost more, it costs more to ship. So we are having to trim other things to make sure that we can sustain a living wage for all of our people. We also had to cut 7 program assistant positions. They were not filled. We did not cut people from their jobs, but we looked at what we had and trimmed those positions down so we could invest in the people that were here. And then of course we had system limitations related to those pay bands. So we were only able to raise as much as other groups and grants could do. In the future, it will be really important for us to do more periodic analyses of our wages. And I would like to look at opportunity hires. So if we look at our staff across the state and at the state level, so in Knoxville, analyze it by demographics and make sure that we do represent the people of Tennessee and the people that we're trying to serve. It is important that we consider all axes of diversity. And so race and ethnicity, of course, are extremely important part of that. Gender is another part of that. And in family consumer sciences, it tends to be that we are very female heavy. And then, of course, the LGBTQ population and the recent research suggests that trans youth are more likely to be food insecure. And so if we think about reaching populations that we haven't traditionally been able to reach through extension, it's important to recruit and pay well people that can relate to those audiences. And then adding a language benefit. So we do pay $1 more an hour for Spanish language, but I'd really like to look at codifying that in our human resource world, in our position descriptions. So, so that is Tennessee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ward. I really enjoyed that presentation. And now we turn to Teresa Jackson from the Oklahoma Tribal Engagement Partners.
Hi, thank you. Next slide. So this is a slide that some in the audience may be familiar with. Here at OKTEP, we often start our presentations with this quote, and it's something that we always refer back to. To me, it helps keep me grounded. So I think that's important. So in the work that we do in Oklahoma, the first step in partnering with Native American communities is learning more about the tribe or the community. So doing the work to know the history and to start to gain an understanding of the nation or tribe. And the same goes for recruitment and hiring. So we really look at the social, cultural, historical, and political environment of our tribal partners. and put in the time to build an effective working relationship. So in our partnership, our model looks a little bit different, and I do have a slide on that later, but I think it's important just to start off and say that when we're talking about equity, it's important for us to put in the work and to learn and research and do what we can rather than put the expectation on the others. So that's where I wanted to start. Next slide. The next couple slides are really some principles that we go back to. And on this slide from NIMHD, the third bullet is the one that I wanted to highlight, and it's supporting the expansion of workforce diversity. So we make a point to find individuals that will bring diversity to our team here at OKTEP. So often that diversity is in the lived experience. We also have a variety of experience in our education levels and backgrounds. And so we're really making a point to have a diverse group because we feel like that's what makes the strongest team for us here at OKTEP. Next slide. On this slide, I really wanted to highlight the last two bullet points because something that we have done recently is work to rename our position descriptions and job descriptions. So we've heard a lot of talk about promotion, and we have not gotten that far yet on our team, but we have really done a lot to promote and support our employees and our staff here. One of the ways that I wanted to share that we've done that is by having opportunities for professional development and further training and education through conferences. And so, yes, they're fun and you do a lot of networking at conferences, but I really feel like that is something that our team has learned a lot from. And it's not just folks that are in a traditional administrative role, but our frontline educators, everyone who is working to help make OKTEP run and do SNAP-Ed programming overall. So some examples would be a Tribal Public Health Conference, Native Nutrition Conference. We've had even the ASNA conference. So we've been able to, and part of this has opened up for funding with us because of the opportunities to not only go in person, but then also the virtual opportunities. So we have taken full advantage and have been able to allow a lot of our staff, basically anyone who's interested, to attend some of these professional development conferences. And I think that that not only supports, but promotes that we want everyone involved in the work and the research that we do. Another example that we've done is for presentations. So I think for those of you who are familiar with OKTEP and our programming, you probably think of a couple of other individual names first in terms of the leaders of our program, but I fully support and admire those folks for oftentimes stepping aside and saying, no, but this person could present on a certain topic. And so I think we're starting to do that more and more. Not only are you hearing from a different group of folks like myself, but I feel like we're also bringing up some of our frontline staff. So we were asked to present on the work that we're doing for the Southeast region last fall. And we opened it up to some of our frontline educators, our frontline staff. And, you know, do you have interest? Would you like to present? You know, we've been asked at OKTEP to talk about the work that we're doing. You all are doing the work. If you are interested, we would love to have you present. So we have had some folks interested. Of course, they always want to do a co-presentation. And so I think that that's part of the mentoring process that we are doing is to, you know, ask folks if you're interested in these opportunities that come our way, let us know what we can do to support you in that. The other point I wanted to make, and I'm catching myself using educator a lot, but just recently we made a big change to update our positions and title descriptions. And so where we had the traditional, excuse me, names of coordinator, manager, educator, we have moved all of our positions to have the word partner in them. So where we used to have community nutrition educators, we now have community health promotion partners. My title had a coordinator at the end of it, and now I'm a partner, just like everyone else. And so the language and the words that we use just to even talk about our position descriptions, I think is where we can make some moves in terms of equity across the spectrum. So next slide. This is a lot on this slide. I always kind of laugh when we're asked to present a position description or for a grant and they want to know like your organizational chart. We really don't have one, and that's on purpose. That's part of the design, is because OKTEP, we're really trying to remove those hierarchical structures. And so again, our principles of practice, something that we go back to all of the time. I feel like that's what grounds us. Those 5 principles are what we're constantly working towards, initiating and living in all of the programming and all of the work and research that we do. You can see this model. We also have social and racial justice and a community of practice. And so we don't really believe that, you know, leadership is always going to be at the hands of certain individuals, rather as the full team. We all have our areas that we can lead in. We all have our own expertise. And so that's why it's more circular, is because for different projects, for different tasks, for different things that we're asked to do, there will be opportunities for everyone from the team to be able to step up into that leadership role. And so that's why it's circular. That's why we want it to be more of a community of practice and all encompassing. So I've already talked about the language. The last thing I wanted to cover was our locations. So next slide. This is the state of Oklahoma. Everything that is in a color is a tribal jurisdiction, tribal nation. There are 39 federally recognized tribes here in Oklahoma, and we are doing our best to partner with all of them. Of course, there are limitations, and just like I mentioned before, it takes years of partnership and collaboration to get to that point. And one of the big things that in terms of recruitment and hiring and retention is, where are our positions located and where does supervision reside? For equity, we really want the answer to both of those questions to be within the communities, not with an individual, not with an organization, but really within that community. So our programming, not only will our programming be more successful, but the power of the position and supervision being in the community will mean that we've put the community first. And that is one of our principles of practice. That to me is what I feel like is always guiding us, is putting our communities first. So other examples related to recruitment and hiring, next slide, are kind of the model that we're using right now. Is everything is very joint and collaborative. And so where we partner with tribal nations, everything we start, you know, it's a longer process to get a job description, but we do work through our HR department, but then also the tribal's HR department. We also advertise on OKTEP websites and social media, but then also the tribe is usually gracious enough to advertise and put it out through their various channels. We also work to make sure that the salary is in line for those various tribes, but then also with our positions here at OKTEP. So every aspect of recruitment and hiring is very collaborative. It's very joint between OKTEP and the particular tribal partner that we're working with. And you can see the examples of our current staff. And not only that recruitment and position description salary process, but then even into our interviewing process. We, set up interviews and we make sure that the individual that's being interviewed knows that it's going to be a team interview and that they should expect 10 to 12 people on the interview. And we also open that up to what would be considered the position peers if it's a health promotion partner. So it's, again, getting outside of that hierarchical structure and opening up these opportunities for not only the decision and the power and who our new employees will be, but also it's helping to promote and teach and, set up all of our employees for success. Whether they stay with us forever or if they move on to another position, they're going to have had a lot more experiences related to recruitment, hiring, these more HR type scenarios, just because of they've been given the opportunity while they've been at OKTEP to experience some of those things. I think the big things, take homes that I kind of wanted to end with are that it's important that when you are kind of, stepping outside of the hierarchical structures that we're so used to and the processes that everyone uses that are considered, more traditional institutional or organizational processes for recruitment and hiring, that you want to just be very clear. When you are inviting, folks to participate in job interviews that maybe haven't had a chance to participate before, you want to do a little bit of training and coaching ahead of time so that they know, this is confidential. These are questions that you can ask. These are, so just being really clear with those expectations for our internal team, but then also for those externally. So for the person being interviewed, you want to make sure that they know it's going to be a team interview. It's going to last probably a little bit longer than your regular interviews, just because of the nature of the group setting. So just really being very clear with those expectations. And then I think the other point that I wanted to drive home was making sure that, we are always looking for ways to bring more people in, because that's really, to me, what equity is about. Not only, are we taking up space for me as a Native Indigenous person, am I taking up space, but then also holding space and welcoming others into that space is really what equity is about for me personally. So thank you. And next person.
Thank you so much, Teresa. We really appreciate that. A lot of really good information there, and I appreciate you sharing. We will try to answer Q&As through email. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to respond to those after the webinar. Our next presentation is from Jennifer Owens from Health Empowers, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Latrice, and thank you so much to all the panelists on the call. I think it's the mark of a good webinar that I'm also taking notes and learning a ton. So thank you so much. I'm so honored to be a part of this group and this conversation. As Latrice mentioned, my name is Jennifer Owens. I'm the president and CEO of an organization called Health Empowers. We are a Georgia-based nonprofit serving really the entire state of Georgia, and also a SNAP-Ed implementing agency as well. And our vision, which I think is maybe next slide, is really a future where all children are nourished and active. I'm going to cover a little bit of sort of a higher level picture of our organization's equity journey over the last couple of years. I'll focus a lot on the internal work that's been happening, and I'm happy to answer any questions after this webinar about some of the more tactical outcomes that we've been doing, but really want to sort of start things off as just sort of a reminder that diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we add accessibility to that as well here at Health Empowers, is more of a way of doing business as opposed to a set of outcomes. And while I'm going to sort of share some examples of the work that we've been doing, I'm always mindful to keep myself in check that this is really sort of a way to do business and not necessarily a checklist of to-dos in terms of, okay, good, we've solved this problem, or we've got this committee in place, or we've fixed this resource. So our equity journey as an organization over the last couple of years really had sort of a pedal put to the gas in the wake of the murders of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, and then frankly here at home with Ahmaud Arbery down in South Georgia. And here at Health Empowers, an internal group got together to start talking about what we could do as an organization. This was just before I arrived on the scene as CEO, coming from an organization that was very much sort of steeped in equity principles. So one of the things that excited me the most about coming to Health Empowers and made me feel like I was in the right place was that the organization was really ready to dive into the work as it related to race equity. This is just some highlights of our equity journey. I'm going to spend a little bit more time breaking them apart, but we've done some pretty, I think, groundbreaking and exciting things here, naming equity by name in our mission, or as our sort of mission, data, and moral imperative, which I'll talk a little bit about. We've done a lot of work internally with the staff as well as our board of directors to develop an organizational-wide charter that really directed our initial work around our DEI focus. We've also been mindful and learned a lot of lessons along the way about who sort of owns this work at the organizational level. And then we have spent a lot of time doing both staff learning and professional development opportunities for both staff and board around what this looks like, both from a personal perspective as well as what this means for us as an organization. Next slide, please. So we had a group of staff here at Health Empowers that represented all sort of settings that we work in, as well as different levels of staff within the organization. So it wasn't just leadership members. It was a group that was pretty diverse in nature in terms of the programs and roles that they touched. And we brought in an external facilitator to basically put together what we considered our organizational charter to really lean into the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And our goal overall that you see there in the top in blue was to develop a systemic and shared understanding around why diversity, equity, and inclusion values, approaches, and skills actually strengthen our ability to deliver on our mission. We had a series of both internal as well as external focus areas that we focused on. You see them listed there. I won't spend a ton of time naming them by name, as I know the slides will be provided for you. But it's really a mixture both of appreciating that people are at a different place in their journey around understanding and finding their own way, as well as some external and program related needs that needed urgent attention in terms of making sure that the resources that were going out the door were accessible, culturally appropriate, and the like. Next slide, please. We started to talk a lot about why our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion was a mission, data, and moral imperative. From a mission perspective, about 80% of the kids and families that our organization serves throughout the state are kids and families of color. So from a mission perspective, not centering DEI, I sort of felt like we were definitely missing the boat in terms of where we needed to focus our work. The second was really coming from a data imperative. This is a graphic from the Georgia Health Policy Center, which is housed here at Georgia State University in Atlanta. And you can see the wide gaps that I know are consistent across the country in terms of what the obesity prevalence looks like when you break that out by racial and ethnic group. And then the last piece was really important part of making sure that we were telling the story both to our staff, our funders, our partners, and our board of directors. And that is not to simply get lost in the sort of practicality of, yes, there's a mission and a data imperative, but there's a real moral imperative too, and not losing sight or track of including that in terms of one of the reasons that we were moving forward in this direction as an organization. Next slide, please. So some of the internal work that we did around sort of staff development, recruitment, retention, et cetera, is reflected here in data. I'm a big believer that diversity is the floor. Diversity is not equity, as I'm sure many of you know and have heard before, but at least looking at it as a place to start. And so this is a collection of metrics that we use as part of our new strategic plan to make sure that we're at least continuing to work on the floor level. So you can see the makeup of our leadership team there on the far left. Long way to go on all fronts, certainly there as well. There's also a look at the breakdown by race of our staff over the last couple of years so that we can continue to make sure we make progress. And then also ensuring that board diversity continues to improve as well. There is a KPI or a metric for the board of directors to ensure we continue to diversify the board. As you can see, we've got a long way to go as an organization, and I will be the first to admit it. These are not data points that I share as sort of a point of pride. It really is just sort of a mark on the journey that we've got a long way to go, and I frankly use them as a reminder moving forward. Next slide, please. In our charter, we had both a collection of internal as well as external work to do. This is just some highlights of what we did internally, thinking about looking at where we were posting for jobs, for example, and recruiting jobs, and being very mindful, coming back to Jennifer's point, which I appreciate, that as a CEO, you know, a white woman CEO, my networks are not as diverse as others on our staff or others in the partner organizations that we work with. And so we've been very mindful to make sure that we have broadened and spent a lot of time recruiting and posting job positions with more diverse communities. This is also a budget investment for us, and that we're paying to make sure that we post these jobs in these places as well. We also initiated a best practice of posting salary ranges to promote transparency. That's both for recruiting as well as retention purposes. We have added questions around diversity and equity and inclusion, both on the hiring side of things, the onboarding of new staff members, as well as our annual performance evaluations around how staff see themselves furthering our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So really thinking about this, again, as part of the DNA of our organization. Our employee handbook was also updated with some substantial changes related to making sure that we were providing an environment that was not just conducive to, you know, being a great place to work and meeting sort of mission outcomes, but also facilitated belonging. And that had everything to do with some tweaks to dress codes, putting in place our first paid parental leave policy, and taking a really hard look at the days off that the organization provided in terms of holidays, and making sure that those were both equitable as well as culturally sensitive and appropriate. I mentioned that we added a lot to the onboarding process around the diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. That's a really exciting thing that our HR department has taken on and has done a great job with. We also have an ongoing internal facing communication that goes out on Fridays called 5 Things on a Friday. And it's just sort of a little fun sort of reminder before the weekend, something to read, something to do, something to listen to, something to be aware of. And we use that as an opportunity to really sort of provide some ongoing professional development and sort of little news here and there, and continue folks' journey along their own equity trajectory as well. And then the last thing here in terms of the internal work is we've been spending a lot of time bringing in external experts, but also training up our staff to be really keen around community needs assessments and not necessarily always be coming from this sort of deficit-based perspective. And when I say deficit-based perspective, I mean that both from a community asset as well as the use of our language, which I appreciate the comments and so much of the mindfulness around the words that we use, so that when we go into a community and we're working with a K-12 school and an early care center and after school program, we have an understanding of what's going on in that community, what's there as an asset, who the partners are, who perhaps those sort of influencers in the middle might be that are really sort of steeped in the community and are seen as influential, that we may want to seek advice from, partner with, and make sure that we're sort of being deferent to. Next slide, please. The other thing on the internal side of things is we are in the process, though it has not yet been approved, of also raising our salary floor for entry-level health educators here, a pretty substantial amount. Again, recognizing that the majority of people that come into our organization at the entry level is where we're making gains in diversity, and wanting to make sure that we're doing a better job paying folks a better and closer to minimum wage. So thank you again to the panelists that brought that up. We are hoping to put that into place October 1st of this year. On the external side of things, just a few things, because I feel like the internal and the external kind of pull on each other. It's one thing to come work in an organization and you hear that, oh yes, we're doing all this work around diversity, equity, inclusion. But if you're not seeing that externally, I'm not quite sure that the message gets through or feels as authentic. And so here's just a few examples of what we're doing externally. We are being very sort of forward and talking about health inequities in a lot of our public-facing communications. We are also doing a lot of trainings and revisions of materials and resources to make sure that those are as sort of culturally appropriate and as effective as they can be. We have also gone through the process of normalizing the use of pronouns We've done a lot of role playing with staff. Most of our staff go into K-12 schools across the state. You know, what happens if you walk into a classroom and a situation around an issue arises that perhaps the teacher doesn't like that you shared your pronouns, or that's not the way we do things here. Having staff sort of equipped and ready to manage through a classroom in that moment without compromising our values here at Health Empowers. And then the last thing, again, is spending a lot of time looking at all of the resources that we do. And that's everything from trainings that we provide, adding closed captioning, making sure that they're delivered in language whenever we possibly can, as well as some of the resources and curriculum that we leave educators with or that students help implement to make sure that those are all sort of run through an equity lens. Next slide, please. So I wouldn't be an honest speaker on diversity, equity, inclusion if I didn't share that this has been really hard work, and we've not done everything, you know, without missteps or pitfalls. And so these are some of the biggest lessons learned really over the last 2 years that I can at least personally speak to as CEO of the organization. And I would say when things started, the diversity, equity, inclusion work sort of lived on the side in the special committee, and there was a liaison back to the leadership team. It was very focused on professional development, which at the time felt right. But in the end, really looking at DEI as a sort of a part of the DNA of our organization is where the work is right now and where it will continue to be. And that is thinking about how do we sort of lead as a team and internally with our staff? How do we develop programming? How are we communicating? And also, how are we evaluating our outcomes? And are we doing that in partnership with the communities that we seek to serve? Also, thinking about accountability for the work internally is really important. This is probably one of the biggest things that I'm mindful of. And again, don't execute perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but also just thinking about how can we be accountable back to the staff when something comes up or when we say we're going to do something and perhaps it doesn't go as planned, or it's left someone wanting more, or perhaps not feeling the way that they, you know, that was intended. And so there's been a lot of work around accountability here. And right now, the sort of principles of DEI live both within our organization-wide strategic plan as well as with the leadership team, so that it doesn't feel sidelined as something that's just kind of an extra add-on. We've also been giving a lot of attention to language, so I appreciated the remarks there as well. We've spent a ton of time on trust. I will say, having done this deep work now during COVID via Zoom versus doing it in person with your team, where you can be, you know, sort of in the muck of the moment, has been two very different experiences for me professionally doing this work. And here at Health Empowers, a lot of this work has been done via Zoom. And I think that we've sort of paid a tax, frankly, in terms of trust and being able to be in the room. And so we are thinking very strategically now about how we can bring folks together in person in safe ways, so that we can do a lot more of this work, because the trust has really been sort of a missing component when you're on Zoom saying some of these things. The other lesson learned that I think is so important is to be really careful to make sure that no harm is done. And instead of speaking to this broadly, I thought perhaps I might just share an example. You know, it is a helpful exercise for staff to come together and sort of pick apart what privilege looks like. And most often than not, our staff of color sort of look to is share your example of when you felt, you know, marginalized, or where you experienced an instance of racism. And whether it's one instance or many, that, you know, essentially does harm and triggers trauma, frankly, for staff of color. So being really mindful as we move through this journey together as a staff, that the goal is to not do harm. The goal is to move the ball. And that is just something that I feel like we learn over and over again, and we're constantly mindful of. Just two last things, and just thinking about the investment in the work. Again, this is not a side project. We've spent a lot of financial resources in terms of it being a budget priority, but also time and attention to this. And so doing it right and really sort of leaning into this work feels like a big lesson learned, especially for our board of directors. And then last but not least, obviously can't sort of end this conversation without constantly sort of sharing lessons and reminding myself and members of our leadership team and staff to just sort of remember sort of the perspective that you're coming from and your privilege. And again, just thinking about how can we do this work and move the ball without doing harm feels really important as a constant reminder. Next slide, please. So the outcome over the work over the last 2 years, lots of internal work, lots of external work, engaging the board of directors, being very forward and open and honest and iterative with our funders, including SNAP-Ed, as well as our institutional funders. And I am proud to say that as of tomorrow, our new strategic plan goes into place, and equity is named throughout the strategic plan, in our aspirational statement, and it's in almost every single strategy in terms of a KPI. And that is something that I'm very proud of, again, because we're thinking about equity here not as a set of outcomes, but instead sort of the DNA or the way we do business. And the fact that this is sort of intertwined throughout all of our strategies makes me feel very proud that we are really leaning into the commitment around race equity, as opposed to just sort of, oh yeah, we do that too, we think about it. So just really excited about that. And last slide, please. I just wanted to share just a couple of really specific examples, and you can go to the next slide, about what we have proposed as far as our next round of SNAP-Ed work. We are looking at developing a program rubric for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and thinking about different physical abilities. And that will sort of guide a lot of our program and evaluation decisions. So really excited again to be thinking about this work on the forefront. And so that is something that we hope to do in the next year. Also looking at, of course, continuing in language materials, et cetera, but really excited that we're going to be rolling out a digital tool to the communities that we serve that will basically provide sort of a geographic specific ad that will pop up in upwards of 30 languages that will direct participants to food assistance sites in their communities, as well as be supplemented with our SNAP-Ed sort of nutrition education information as well. So really excited about that. We have begun some disaggregation of data. In my mind, data disaggregation, again, is sort of a floor. Where are we baseline wise? How can we then use that information to inform resource decisions and things like that? And so we'll continue our work on that data disaggregation. We're also doing a lot of focus groups and collecting qualitative data from community, which is very new and exciting for Health Empowers. And then the last thing we're doing is making sure that resources that we purchase as an organization reflect the community. So we have done sort of an overhaul of our book list, for example, that we provide to our early care and education sites across the state, for example, and also looking at diversifying the dollars that we spend that represent vendors of color and establishing a baseline with that as well. And I believe that is the last slide. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this important work.
Thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate you sharing all the good work that Health Empowers is doing. Next slide, please. So I'd like to close this out with some final thoughts. So, everyone has a role in this work, and I encourage, everyone attending to kind of think through where their influence lies, where they might be able to advance equity in their own workplaces. And we'll be able to share some of the resources that we've gathered after this webinar, and we'll include it. But some of them could include, establishing shared language, identifying and supporting champions of this work, gathering and disaggregating data around disparities in hiring, retention, promotion, and compensation, completing a compensation or a compensation audit or assessment, drafting diversity goals, reviewing recruitment procedures, building internal capacities to support equity-centered initiatives and projects through training, peer learning, community of practices, establishing a feedback mechanism for employees and community members so that you can get a really solid view around how your work is viewed in the community and how is your leadership viewed within your organization. Creating policies and incentives to act on changes. So if you do identify there are areas that need to be improved, really sourcing and acting with a sense of urgency to address it. And really shifting the organizational culture, thinking about what's celebrated, what gets people promoted, what's incentivized, and how can we really reimagine creating spaces where we are celebrating equity-centered and equity-focused projects, initiatives. Everyone has a place in this work, and it's a lot. And so I don't want anyone to get discouraged or think that your contribution is too little. I think everyone has a place, and I want everyone to feel as if they have the resources and the tools they need to advance equity in their own workspaces. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions and answers, but we have collected them in the Q&A. So if you have a couple of last minute ones, feel free to put it there, and we'll make sure to respond to those in our emails when we follow up. And if you'd like to have a more discussion-based forum, our community of practice will be July 7th, which is next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will be for about an hour. And the registration for that forum will be in the chat, and we'll also include it in the follow-up. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for each of our.
You go to the last slide, sorry.
Oh, there's
Sorry.
the last slide, sorry.
Just has the info.
Got it. Thanks, Molly. The information for next week's community of practice is here, and we hope to see you next week. Please take care of yourselves and be well.
Thank you.